the OBX Wave Report, where we cover all things waves, weather, and climate, as well as beach lifestyle for you guys here. And today we're covering we're covering the local conditions at present for the Outer Banks and for the Atlantic in general, but the Outer Banks specifically, as we're going to look at some local conditions for the Outer Banks. But we are also looking now at the forecast, the weather forecast according to the official weather models, which are right now calling for a strong storm across the US East, which is likely now, according to the models, to produce gale force conditions across the US East Coast through Friday for the most part and into Saturday, as well as a strong low pressure system is predicted to strengthen across the eastern US, focusing in on close to the Ohio River Valley and then tracking off to the north into Canada. But right now, conditions in the Outer Banks at least are relatively calm. They're cold and calm, or calmer for sure, and with wave heights across the Outer Banks ranging from around 2 to 5 feet for the most part. And this is a wave model that mainly captures offshore waves, and offshore waves tend to be higher than the waves that run right into shore. But right offshore, we're seeing wave heights in the range of 3 to 6 feet off the Outer Banks with a confused swell. So waves coming from kind of different directions at this point off the Outer Banks. It's worth mentioning that up in the North Atlantic, we have a strong storm right now that is producing very large waves just south of Iceland in the range of 42-foot significant wave heights. And of course, some of these waves are up to double the significant wave heights typically. So very large, very heavy seas out here just south of Iceland between Greenland and the UK here. And this storm system is also blowing a very large swell in through the southern beaches of Ireland and the southwestern beaches of England, with the offshore swell ranging around 23 feet. And the nearshore swell, again, this is not right on shore, but the nearshore swell ranging around 20 feet in some locations. This large swell is also impacting beaches in France and beaches in northern Spain. Further, flipping back to the other side of the Atlantic, I know I didn't do a really consistent view of the East Coast and Caribbean beaches, but the waves just offshore of Florida are, I believe, rather small. Well, not too small, in the range of around 4 feet. The waves just offshore of the Bahama Island chain are in the range of 5 feet off the north-facing beaches. And then moving down into the Caribbean, the waves just north of the north-facing beaches are in the range of 4 to 5 feet as well, with possibly, larger waves as you get into the smaller islands further east. So that's a general view of the Atlantic Basin. Going to start talking about weather conditions at present. We have a march of disorganized weather patterns across the U.S. where there's clusters of stormy areas. I guess there's associated with very weak low pressure impulses, but for the most part, everything across the USA right now is pretty disorganized. For the southeast, cold air has intruded from the northwest, and so it's cold across the southern and central US and the mid-Atlantic, as well as cold air moves in from Canada. Moving out into the Atlantic Ocean, we have a strong ocean storm system just south of Iceland, which was indicated in the wave map that we were looking at. And I'm going to go ahead and flip to the infrared satellite, which doesn't go all the way across the ocean, so you can see some of these disorganized weather patterns moving across the US right now. You got a bit of a swirl in this area of storms here, and what looks like some rather powerful thunderstorms firing off in eastern Texas right now. You've got a flow of moisture running in from the Pacific across the Gulf of Mexico and then streaming on across Florida and into the Atlantic Ocean, just southeast of the US here. And again, we've talked about this a number of times for the past few wave reports. The stream of moisture here, if it gets tapped by an impulse moving in from the northwest, could produce a powerful storm system. And that's kind of what's predicted for later this week. Further off the US West Coast is another area of moisture, which is impacting Washington, Oregon, and Northern California at present, and is likely to move onshore and help to provide some energy for the impulse, which is predicted to occur or form or, well, turn into a storm, a pretty major storm system for the US East later this week and bring those gale force conditions to the US East Coast. All right, drilling down to some local conditions for the Outer Banks. Let me get my notes here for local waves. And I think I might start south and then go north. I know we typically start at Jeanette's Pier and then go south. Let's just go ahead and start south because I want to talk a little bit about the south later on in this episode of the OBX Wave Report. So we're going to start in Ocracoke right now, and Ocracoke is an island that is part of the Outer Banks Island chain that is only accessible by ferry. There is no bridge to Ocracoke. You've got to take a ferry over from Hatteras to Ocracoke and then drive down Route 12 to get into Ocracoke Village. If you've never been there, it's a gorgeous place. It's almost like a Hobbit town. I think of it as like a Hobbit town for beachgoers, kind of, and surfers, and just people who love the beach lifestyle. It's very cozy in Ocracoke. It's a small community, very friendly. Excuse me, I had a little wintertime issue there, but it's very friendly. It's very cozy, very welcoming, fun little restaurants and little shops. And one of the things that's so charming about the Outer Banks is there's all these family-owned businesses, individually owned businesses that are just so friendly and so inviting. And so you get away from the commercial and you get more into kind of a community feel that is just so good for the soul. It's just so welcoming. It's not all, go, go, go so fast. It's not all about just making a buck. It's about, making a good life. And Ocracoke is kind of just a stunning example of that. Manio, where I presently live, is also a lot like that. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about Manio in one of these segments about how I live here in like real life Mayberry. but I'll talk about that later. But Ocracoke is just such a fun, beautiful little place. But it's also a great place for surf, although not today. Today, Ocracoke waves are 1 foot, so 1 foot waves in Ocracoke are very small. If you're going to ride, maybe get a longboard, if that. The primary period is 16 seconds for the primary swell, 9 seconds for the secondary swell. And the winds are out of the north-northwest, so just coming in here, let's see, like about boop, like that. And at 16 miles per hour. So, and this is an offshore flow with that southeast facing beach there in Ocracoke. The air temperature is cold. It's cold across the Outer Banks today. I mean, when I say cold, it's cold for the Outer Banks. I mean, if you're like from Alaska or I don't know, like even the upper mid-Atlantic, it's not going to sound that cold, but it's also, you got to remember, damper down here. So the cold feels colder because it's damper. So the air is right now 40 degrees Fahrenheit down in Ocracoke, and the ocean water temperature is 65 degrees, considerably warmer. But ocean water temperatures are also coming down as you get the cooling influence of the colder air over the land. The weather conditions are cold for the Outer Banks in Ocracoke, sunny, and the expected high today is 46 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, the reason why I'm talking about Ocracoke right now is the storm system that's coming in is predicted to bring southerly winds, so southwest, southeast, and south winds. in a very strong onshore flow for the southern beaches of the Outer Banks, and this is expected to generate much more powerful surf later this week. Of course, it would be very rough in the storm conditions, but after the storm, things are likely to clean up, and you could get some really good waves down there after the storm that is predicted for this Friday and Saturday. And we're going to go into more about the storm later in the wave report. I'm going to also talk a little bit about Buxton because Buxton is the place where all the waves hit in the Outer Banks. And so moving north to Buxton, which is just north of Hatteras Island or North Buxton, not the community here facing the Sound, but the ocean facing beaches here of Buxton. Waves are 5 to 6 feet, which are among the largest today for the Outer Banks, and that's typical. Buxton seems to always have the largest waves. One of these days, some other place will have larger waves, but for today, that's not the case. So 5 to 6 foot waves presently at Buxton, with a period for the primary swell of 15 seconds and 6 seconds for the secondary swell. Winds are out of the north-northwest, so again, coming in here kind of like this at 19 miles per hour, and that's an offshore flow over at Buxton. Air temperatures are 42 degrees Fahrenheit, so a little bit warmer than Ocracoke, but not by much. Ocean temperatures, however, are cooler at 62 degrees Fahrenheit. At this point, a lot of people have shifted to like heavier wetsuits in the 3 to 4 mil range. 62 degrees Fahrenheit ocean would indicate maybe a 2-3, maybe a 3-4. Yeah, probably a 2-3, but with those air temperatures, people are tending toward the heavier wetsuits, which is completely understandable because those colder air temperatures do have an impact, and you need to protect yourself against both the air and the ocean under these wintertime conditions here in the Outer Banks. Weather's cold for the Outer Banks, sunny and breezy with an expected high at Buxton of 44 degrees Fahrenheit. And heading on up north to my neck of the woods here, we're going to go on past Body Island and get to Jeanette's Pier. And right now, the wave conditions at Jeanette's Pier are 3 to 4 feet, according to the monitors. The wave period for the primary swell is 15 seconds. For the secondary swell, it's 6 seconds. Winds are out of the northwest, just north of northwest, so like a little bit more of a northerly component there at 20 miles per hour. And so this is offshore with a little bit of a cross-shore component. And yeah, we didn't want to see that. Okay. The air temperature is 41 degrees Fahrenheit down at Jeanette's Pier. The ocean water temperature is considerably cooler at 54 degrees Fahrenheit. And so that's solid in the 3-4 mil wetsuit range that you need there for the ocean temperatures. And with that cold air, you're going to want your hoodie and your booties and your gloves probably. You're probably not going to want to have a lot of exposed skin to that cold, that wet, and that wind that can really, make you feel really cold. Weather conditions are cold, sunny, breezy, and an expected high today of 42 degrees at Jeanette's Pier. All right, so that's just the general overview of local conditions for the Outer Banks. As over the coming week, conditions are likely to remain similar to what they are today, maybe even with waves dropping off a bit as we get in toward midweek. But then as we get on toward later week, we expect to see this very strong eastern storm system develop. And let's see, let's go ahead and look at the weather models. And I ran this thing all the way through because I wanted to see what the GFS model was going to indicate for like the 2-week time frame. But let's just go ahead and start the model here now. So right now we've got like a strong low in the North Atlantic. I think that one is in the upper 960. Oh no, upper 950 millibar range. So very strong storm up here in the North Atlantic off of Ireland, producing those 40-foot waves that we mentioned earlier out here off Iceland. And of course, those 40-foot waves are way out in the shipping lanes there, but also bringing in some powerful swells to the southern beaches of England and Ireland and some of the beaches in Canada. I'm sorry, not Canada, in France and northern Spain here. We also have a low up here in the Canadian Maritimes producing stormy conditions and just just kind of a bunch of sloppy weather across the central and northern U.S. But advancing this model to Friday, well, actually, let's just watch this impulse. So we've got a little low pressure system. Center this view for you guys a little bit more. And of course, this model is provided by Tropical Tidbits, which is a fantastic site if you want to look at weather models, particularly those focused on ocean storms, especially hurricanes and tropical systems. But so we get a little impulse here off of Florida with some stormy conditions and a low pressure system. But this is by Wednesday, which tracks on off to the east pretty quickly. This running in along that stream of moisture that I've been talking about. But then by Thursday, look at this little wave here of rough weather and these tightly packed isobars here over on the left-hand side of our screen. That there is the beginning of a low pressure formation as the jet stream digs down. So the upper level winds are digging down and the cold air is rushing in behind it. And so you got that cold air rushing in over the mountains, creating all this instability. And you've got that stream of moisture down here in the Gulf of Mexico just waiting to be tapped. And when that happens, you get these clouds forming, a lot of convection, a lot of lift over the central U.S. And with that instability, you get this vortex starting to swirl in the form of this low pressure system on Thursday. And advancing the model, you see the low pressure impulse right on up that boundary between the jet stream and along that dip in the jet stream where the upper level winds are moving the fastest. And then so you have a very strong high pressure system moving in behind, and then you have a low pressure system forming, and then a high pressure system also to the north and east. So it's like kind of sandwiching between ridges and troughs in the upper level jet stream here, and you get this parallel nature of weather systems, which can create really strong storms in the trough, and that's pretty much what we're expecting to see as this trough in the jet stream produces a strong low into Friday, early Friday at 992 millibars. The storm system is not expected, at least in this model, to be as strong as it was indicated yesterday, but still a very strong overland system. And by mid-Friday, you're looking at a 95 millibar system with a very strong, very broad southerly, southeasterly, and southwesterly flow over the eastern U.S. and starting to bring in some gale conditions along the coast. And then the storm strengthens over the Great Lakes and then moves north into Canada, but still is dragging in very strong winds off the Atlantic Ocean. And we're going to look at some wind models to capture this wind field. It's a very large, very broad system, so it's going to have wide-ranging effects as a storm system if it does form in the way it's predicted. At present, the storm's not as strong, so maybe not as crazy intense as was predicted yesterday, but still a very intense storm system in the 970 millibar range. If it continues the weekend, then it will be less of a major event, but weekend in the model forecast. But I don't really see. I don't know. I don't know if that's really likely given the conditions at play here. Although of course things could just the dip in the jet stream could not be intense. The interaction between the cold and the warm and the vortex formation could be not as intense. So we'll just keep watching the weather models, keep listening to the weather experts and see what's expected to happen for this system. I just wanted to show you guys the dip in the jet stream that's predicted to form in the global forecast system model. So you got a huge dip in the jet stream running down from across the Arctic down across Alaska and then just dipping down into the central US and then creating that like classic like omega type wave feature in the jet stream where we've got this huge upper level swirl in the atmosphere that transfers down to the surface, at least as predicted in the model. And that's what's one of the major features of this system that brings cold air into collision with warm, moist air to the south. And then at the surface, I just wanted to show you guys some wind conditions. So here we have the swirl of the low pressure system predicted for the central US over the Great Lakes region. And you can see these winds just blowing in off across the Gulf of Mexico. This is gale force, basically gale force or near gale force conditions across the Gulf of Mexico. These are northerly winds behind the front, but as you get closer to the front, which is draped in this image from the model, is draped across the northeast, sweeping down just offshore and then sweeping down off the tip of Florida. So the winds behind the front are coming in from the west and the northwest. The winds in front of the front are coming from the south and the southeast. So here, for example, off Ocracoke, winds are in the range of gale force at 38 miles per hour in this model. And I've seen some, and these are sustained winds. The gusts are higher. There's one model for Ocracoke that's showing gusts in the range of 50 miles per hour, so very strong southwest winds at this time. And for Ocracoke, the winds are supposed to be from, or expected to be from, southeast, south, and southwest as the front comes in, and rather strong winds over the course of about 24 hours. So near gale force and gale force conditions for the southern Outer Banks. Over on the east side, most of the winds are going to be coming in from the south, so these will tend to be more cross shore, and so you'll tend to get less direct effects from those winds and more chop. But for the south-facing beaches, the waves will tend to get quite a bit larger. And right now, the wave models are projecting like 5 to 8 feet during these stormy conditions. It is also worth noting that the storm right now is predicted to bring strong gale force conditions for Long Island and Connecticut and the Rhode Island area. So like, let's just look right offshore here. So sustained winds projected in the GFS model in the range of 48 miles per hour, which is solid gale force conditions. And of course, the gusts will be higher in those that region of strong wind. And close to the shore, you're still seeing around 42 mile per hour, 41, and upper 30 mile per hour wind speeds. So very strong winds coming onshore from the southeast for New York City, Long Island region, Connecticut, and Rhode Island here. So very, very strong winds predicted for portions of the East Coast. We're not, at least in this model, we're not getting up into like storm force conditions, which would be even more serious. And it's also worth noting that these winds are coming in from the southeast. Southeast wind patterns tend to have less tidal flooding impact because the winds they're blowing with the Gulf Stream as opposed to against the Gulf Stream. So if you've got the Gulf Stream running in the ocean water up here from south to north, and it actually creates this suction, for lack of a better word, that pulls the ocean away from the US East Coast, and that's just a prevailing condition. So ocean levels are lower than they would typically be because the current creates that suction away from the East Coast. But if you get that northeast wind coming in, it reverses some of that suction and causes water to back up along the East Coast and bring those ocean levels back up. And so that's what tends to happen in a nor'easter, in addition to the wind-driven surf and the wind-driven water that would pile up in any event due to strong winds. This is more of like I don't know, for lack of a better word, a southeaster. So these winds are coming in from the southeast. You probably still get some higher oceans, higher water levels, but not as high as it would be typically if there was like a northeast wind. Now, of course, for New York City, Rhode Island, and Connecticut, the strong southeast wind will likely bring in some higher tides and some coastal flooding in this range. So but less coastal flooding likely for the Outer Banks and for other regions along the East Coast in this system with these southeasterly, southerly, and southwesterly winds. So just a general analysis. I did want to throw the Beaufort wind scale up here for just a reference. And these wind speeds that we're looking at are in the 7, 8, and 9 range for the Beaufort scale. So you're looking at near gale force conditions, and severe gale conditions in isolated areas. And the gales are pretty significant ocean storms. Of course, this storm, the low pressure is over land, but even so, it's predicted to drag in those gale force winds. And last of all, I wanted to show you a wave model for Ocracoke. We started with Ocracoke for our local, conditions for the Outer Banks. And I just wanted to show you the projected wave heights for Ocracoke this week, starting today at 1 foot, Tuesday at 1 foot, Wednesday at 1 to 2 feet. And then as the storm starts to kick in, you get quite a bit larger waves on Thursday, starting out at 2 to 3 feet, but ending the day at 6 to 9 feet, or no, 5 to 8 feet. And then as you run into Friday, you get 6 to 9, 5 to 8 foot, and even 6 to 10 foot conditions later in the day with those strong southerly winds kicking in. And looking down here at the projected winds for 6 p.m. on Friday for Ocracoke, wind speeds are projected to be in the range of 38 mile per hour sustained winds with 54 mile per hour gusts. That is very strong. We're out of the southwest, so still onshore with maybe a little bit of a cross-shore component. And then the waves fall down on Saturday as the winds shift strong from the southwest, so shifting offshore. 36 mile per hour sustained winds and 42 mile per hour gusts predicted at Ocracoke for early Saturday. Very strong wave and wind conditions projected for the U.S. East Coast for Friday. And that's what's in the forecast. I'll probably be covering this thing for a little while over the next few days, and we'll see how it shapes up. We'll see if it does shape up to be as strong as it is predicted right now. Hopefully, it won't be any stronger. And if we get a coastal low out of this thing, which is looking less and less likely, of course, all these predictions will change. This will turn more into a nor'easter style event if a coastal low does form here off the U.S. East Coast. If you get that dip in the jet stream pushing as far as the eastern seaboard and then developing a low here off Florida, then we'll have more of a coastal event than we have already. But this, even with this strong low here over the Great Lakes, we can still have a pretty significant coastal storm as well. So thank you for joining me for this recent edition of the OBX Wave Report. And please remember to do everything you can to help save our wonderful coastal communities from the increasing impacts of human-caused climate change driven by fossil fuel burning, which is now causing the oceans to rise and providing more fuel for oceanic storms, particularly in the North Atlantic. So thank you again, and I will be back